about her. I want to introduce Matthew Andrews, reparations group in Massachusetts, and we're going to talk about the work that he and his group, along with his colleague Michelle, are doing up in Amherst. And once Tamara is able to get back on, we'll uh, bring her into the discussion. Without further ado, Matthew, could you introduce yourself and tell us something about your work up in Massachusetts?
Yeah, my name's Matthew Andrews, and um, just to kind of on a personal note, my wife and I own a yoga studio and run yoga teacher trainings and retreats in India and that sort of thing. So that's kind of like my day job. And I've been interested in reparations for a while. Before the Ta-Nehisi Coates article came out, before it was anything that anybody could talk about and be understood in the popular culture. It was something that felt to me like imperative, like, the only way that we're going to move forward on any of the other racial equity issues that we're dealing with is to acknowledge and apologize for the past. If we don't do that, then how can we move forward? So this was kind of churning in my awareness for a long time. And then last summer, as we all know, there was a big awakening of consciousness and around the time that George Floyd was murdered by a white police officer in front of everybody, in front of the whole country. And so that awakening changed the conversation. And Michelle and I, around that time, started Michelle and I connected around an article that she had written about compassion and what the bandwidth was going to be, how long white people were going to be paying attention to George Floyd and Black Lives Matter and kind of that movement that was building. And so we started a conversation, and then we started talking about whether maybe something could be done on the local level. We were looking at the national situation and assuming nothing about the presidency and the makeup of the Senate and the House. And so we didn't want to wait for the national conversation to move. We thought maybe we can just do something locally. So that's where we started. And I don't know how much you want me to get into the details right now, but that's kind of the background for me.
And so, what kind of things have you been doing since the Floyd murder? What's been your process and your organizing efforts?
Yeah, so we started pretty small with a petition, just to see, what was possible. And we were specifically inspired by the work in Evanston. Evanston, Illinois is the first successful municipal reparations fund that was developed and spearheaded by Alderman Robin Ruth Simmons. And so we reached out to her actually before we developed the petition, and we learned about some of the things that their process, and they specifically had focused on an apology and an acknowledgement, like a resolution. They're also their town government, town council, city council for them. Amherst is called a town council. It's the same format. The government's set up in the same way. So they had an apology and an acknowledgement and a fund. Those were the two things that they were looking to develop. At that time, everything hadn't come into place the way it has now. And they also were using the cannabis, they had legalized marijuana and were taxing cannabis. And so they were using that as a revenue source. And this town also recently legalized marijuana. So all the pieces were there. We circulated this petition based on the Evanston model and said, this is what we are seeking, an acknowledgement and an apology for slavery and post-slavery anti-Black structural racism. and a fund, a financial reparations fund. And so the petition went around, got a lot of attention. People were responsive. You know, we were looking around the town. You see Black Lives Matter signs at the library and on people's lawns. And the question for us was like, is there actually enough goodwill? Like, how much of this is performative, and how much is it that people actually will follow through on something? How much do Black Lives matter? You know, so that question fueled the petition. The petition was successful enough. We got some write-up in the paper and a couple hundred signatures, and so we thought, okay, let's go for it. Let's see what we can do. So we started working with the town council, and we had 3 town councilors who helped us develop a resolution. The resolution was specifically the apology and acknowledgement. So it came with a 10-page historical document outlining very briefly. So in 10 pages, you know, you can't cover everything, but from the beginning of the settlement of Amherst to now, the involvement with slavery and the involvement with structural racism and things like, you know, restrictive covenants in real estate transactions and involvement of major town, you know, people whose streets and town common spaces are named after their relationship to the slave trade or to structural racism. You know, so some very specific things that I think, you know, Amherst, there's 5 colleges here. It's a progressive kind of thinking. It thinks of itself as being progressive. It bills itself as progressive. So I think people here were pretty surprised at some of the actual specifics that we brought together. So anyway, that 10-page document accompanied the resolution. The resolution was an acknowledgement and an apology, and it ended with a statement of commitment to a path of repair. That was passed unanimously by the town council on December 7th. And then we kind of, from there, really dug into the next round of research. Sorry, I think you're muted now, David.
Yeah, I'm getting feedback, so I'm muting myself. So this town council was just 2 months ago.
Yes. Yeah.
Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry. Maybe it stopped. I was getting a lot of feedback and having a hard time hearing you. So I'm
okay. Yeah, I heard that feedback too, but it's clear now. So yeah, so after the town council resolution was passed, so first of all, that was actually a moment, because now we have centered this issue, and this is, you know, Black people in this country have been promised things and have been offered platitudes for hundreds of years. And so now the pressure's on, because we risk just kind of re-traumatizing people by saying, yeah, we're going to do something, and not actually doing anything. So we really feel like now the work is beginning. And we've dug back into another research effort. So there's kind of simultaneously a number of different things going on. One is a research effort that will document why, the why behind the current racial disparities. So right now in Amherst, the average income, annual income for Black families or for white families is 2.5 times that of Black families. The average white family is 4 times more likely to own a home. And out of the graduating class from Amherst Regional High School in 2019, 40% of the kids went to private colleges. None of those kids were Black. None of those graduates, none of the Black graduates went to private colleges. So I mean, it's also from the local hospital, mental health hospitalization rates for Black folks is 1.7 times higher than the white population. So that's not a lot of detail, those few points, but they're very telling. And especially for a town that thinks of itself as progressive. The Black population here is quite small also, it's 6%. And that's not a mistake. You know, you have cities where there's gentrification and there's ghettoization. Here, there's just never really been a substantial population of Black folks, and that's the other piece that we're looking into in our research is why is that? How did that happen? What part did redlining and racial covenants play, restrictive racial covenants play in that? How did Amherst get to be the white enclave that it is? So we're digging into these details now, and we're going to be producing a much longer document, probably in the scope of like 30 to 40 pages, sometime in the next few weeks. That's going to be coming out. And we're using that information both to build the case for the fund. So that's kind of our next big step, is to develop a fund. And we're going to be partnering with the town of Amherst, with anchor institutions like the universities. There's three, well, there's the University of Massachusetts Amherst, which is like 30,000 students, pretty big school. And then there's Amherst College, which is one of the most elite colleges in the country, with one of the biggest endowments of any college in the country. So we consider these anchor institutions in the town. They have a huge influence on the town and the town population and employment and everything like that. And they're doing their own work into looking at their relationship to slavery. I mean, as you can imagine, internal pressure and internal and external pressure has led to their own work in exploring their relationship to the roots of slavery and racism. And so we are hoping that will dovetail with what we're proposing to do. And then we also are going to be doing a private fundraising campaign to invite individual white folks to contribute to the fund. So that's the fund piece. Where else the town right now is researching legal possibilities. So what is legal and what's not, what they can, what do we need to be, can they give to a 501c3? Does it need to be a certain kind of organized entity, et cetera? So what kind of funds would be available? Can they allocate the cannabis funds? So we're kind of looking at all those possibilities. Simultaneously, we've been clear from the beginning that it's not going to be white folks that determine the allocation of this money. We're working with Robin Rue Simmons, who was the architect of the Evanston Reparations Fund, to develop a Black stakeholders group. And there's a meeting, I think it's going to be next Sunday, led by Robin Rue Simmons, with a diverse group of community leaders, Black community leaders from Amherst, to begin the conversation about what repair looks like and what the allocation process could look like. And so that all needs to get into place before we can start actually asking for money or developing a fund. We need to understand, what the allocation process is going to look like. So that's going on, and that will also be informed by the research as well, so that people can get a sense, in determining, in some ways the question is, who has been injured by anti-Black racism in Amherst? And that's not necessarily people who live in Amherst right now. That could be people who have been prevented from living in Amherst. In Evanston, they're focusing the reparations effort. One of the primary focuses is housing. And they determined, I can't remember the exact years, but it's like anybody who's lived in Evanston during a period of time and can demonstrate that that they faced housing discrimination. So they have this kind of process of determining who's eligible and what their focus is. And we're going to have to do the same thing, develop a process based on the reality of this town and its history to determine who the injured parties are, and then what the prioritization is for allocation. So that's the kind of basic scope of we've got the research, we've got the legal research, we've got building the case for the fund and networking within the business and town official and university communities. We've got networking within the Black community and kind of building this stakeholder group. And that's basically where we're at right now.
This is I'm getting feedback here. don't know why that's happening. It never happens to me before, and not sure what's going on with it. Uh, the Hello, how are you?
Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, David, you may have to, Matthew, you just may have to mute while David's talking. That may prevent some of the feedback that you guys are getting. But I just want to thank you for joining us on this broadcast. I am having some major technical difficulties this morning. My computer's doing something so weird. But I just want to thank you for joining us and just thank you for all the great work that you are, if nothing else, trying to do in Amherst. The fact that you are a white man, we're hopeful to have Michelle with you as well. As white people, bringing this conversation to the forefront is powerful. I have a lot of questions, and my very first question to you is, how have you been able to engage other white people, and what has been the feedback there?
Yeah, there are pockets of people that are ready to take this on, that are excited, that want to be involved. And like I said before, Amherst has this kind of progressive pedigree. It likes to think of itself as a progressive town. So there's people whose consciousness is leaning in that direction. And I think there's people who have been, and this is different than other places in the country, there's people who have been kind of waiting for something to do besides have a Black Lives Matter sign on their lawn. They're waiting for some action. So we have had, like I said, the town council, which is entirely white. Well, there's one Indian woman on the town council, and everyone else is white. They unanimously passed the resolution with no debate. So that was there. We haven't had pushback, but we haven't really it's like we haven't kind of started grinding yet. We haven't really started, the town hasn't considered in actuality what a fund would look like, or how much money would go to it, or where, when the money conversations start, I imagine that's when things are going to get a little more complicated as far as the people who oppose this speaking out more loudly. So far, we haven't really faced any vocal opposition.
So here's my challenge. Here's our challenge here in Georgia. David has been, he and I have been hosting this broadcast now for well over 2.5 years, going into 3 years this summer. And David has always found it, his challenge. And David, I know you can speak to this, is engaging white people into these conversations and getting them more involved and helping them to see that this is not the threat that some of them might want to believe that it is. So, how do you help? Georgia is, we live in the Atlanta metro area, and there's a running joke here that's Atlanta ain't Georgia. So, Georgia has its own kind of, it's still the South. And a lot of it, honestly, is still the old South. And they don't understand this. It seems very radical, which, this is something that is necessary. This is something that will heal the wounds of this entire nation. America has to get it right with Black people. And before we get it right with anybody else, before we get it right with any other nationality, America has to get it right with Black people. So I'm just excited that it's happening in Amherst, Massachusetts. But what would be some of your insight to help us around the South?
I grew up in Baltimore, which is not the South, but it's not the North. It's one of the most highly gentrified cities in the country, and has a strong history of racism. And I grew up, actually, my mom put me on a bus when I was 5 years old going down York Road. We lived on the north edge of the city, straight down York Road into the city, down to North Avenue. And my best friend in first and second grade was a guy named William Hart, who was Black, and his family was Black, and his extended family was Black, and his neighbors were Black, and it was a Black neighborhood. And I grew up there. I went to his house after school every day. His mom was my mom. You know, she took care of me. I spent the night at his house. So I grew up at a very young age feeling like a part of a Black family, like I was welcomed, you know, I was welcomed in. And so for me, there isn't, when you say, it's not conceptual to me what you're saying about we need to get it right with Black people in order to heal this country. It's visceral. And I don't know how to give that experience to other people. Other than, and you know, I mean, I guess there's two parts of it. I know that the wound of this country affects all of us. That our inability to look at the past, our inability to come clean with the reality of what white people did to Black people. And I think that's a whole nother thing, is that we often talk about slavery and racism as Black people being the victims. Well, what about the perpetrators? We don't often talk about the people who did the enslaving and the people who did the structural racism and passed the laws and terrorized Black communities in the North and the South for over 100 years. And you could, you know, argue that mass incarceration and the policing is ongoing terrorism now. So, you know, how to help people understand this is not a moral obligation. This is us. This isn't like us doing something for them. I mean, I think that's often what happens with white folks is in reparations is, why should we do something for them? There is no them. This is us doing something for us, and the whole, like, helping people to understand that our whole stuckness, our whole, the division in the country, the our inability to, you know, all the places that we're stuck kind of can be traced back to our inability to face up to the reality of what we've done. And you think of a kid who gets in a fight or does something mean to someone, that kid needs to process that. And it's not just the person who got beat up or the person who had something done mean to them or got bullied. The bully is hurting and has a wound in their own heart that needs to be healed by recognizing, apologizing, and making it right. And I've seen kids, you know, it's on an individual level, you can see a kid go through that process of reconciling and they feel free, they relax, they're relieved. And I think this whole country would benefit, would feel relaxed, would feel relieved by a process, a serious, sincere process of reparations that includes financial reparations, but also includes a process of healing. I mean, that's all I can offer in a way. I don't know how far that goes, but I do know that what happened last summer was an awakening, and it's not going to stop. It might, you know, there's fits and starts. There's in any kind of evolutionary process, there's a thesis, an antithesis, and a synthesis. There's a push forward where things come forward, and then there's the pushback, the inevitable pushback, and it's frustrating and difficult. But then there's a synthesis where it kind of seeps out. It takes time to seep out into the collective consciousness. And then there's another push forward that has a little bit more power to it. And I can only trust in that and kind of offer myself as an instrument as the time, you know, if there's something that I can say that can be helpful at the right time, then I hope that's possible. But the question you ask is a tough one. And I know I gave a long answer, but it's a tough question about how to reach people. And I think you're muted, actually.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, there.
It reminds me of, you know, like someone that is an alcoholic, right? And you're saying you got to first admit that you're an alcoholic. And that's the hard part. That's the biggest hurdle to get past, is the admission that I am an alcoholic. So it's, you know, when it comes to, you know, white people saying that this happened, I think that is the hardest part, being able to admit that, yes, my forefathers enslaved these people, and yes, I am living. I have benefited from this slave labor, and my family has this generational wealth off the backs of these people that we didn't actually earn. They did the work, and we benefited. So, that kind of admission, I don't know if, there's some white people like yourself and others that are able to say this happened, and how do we remedy this? And then there's a lot of people that just can't bring themselves to do it. So I think for me personally, I don't necessarily focus on the admission, because I know there's a lot of people that can't. I keep trying to find other ways to those that can't get there. How else can I reach you to help you understand that reparations is necessary?
Yeah, it's a hard question, because unless that happens, unless people do have an experience of why, you see a little kid again, like, did you punch your brother in the face? No. Right? The first react, no. Like, I want to hide it. I don't want anybody to know that. That's where we are. It's this kind of primal human thing. Just, we know now that race is a social construct, right? There's nothing about race that determines capability. There's also nothing about race that determines morals or evil. So it's something I've been grappling with kind of my whole life, is why is it white people? What the hell is wrong with white people? Like, are you serious? Like, the kind of crazy, torturous, sadistic, horrible things that people have done systematically and structurally. Is there something wrong with white people? It's like, but if we know that race is just a social construct and it has no biological reality, then that can't be. And so there's this fundamental ego thing. There's this fundamental human thing about oppression and about pushing other people down, and self-protection and self-defense. I need to get mine. I need to protect, my space against the other. And that you can see across cultures and across different groups of people, that tendency to, and once I've got it, once I've got my gated community and my sense of protection, I'm becoming even more addicted to it, right? It's like what you said about addiction. I'm even more addicted to my gated community, my sense of comfort. And then the media is feeding me fear, feeding me, look at all the terrible things that are going to happen if you open up your gates. Look at the chaos out there, and the what people are doing to each other. You better stay locked up in your gated community. So yeah, that I think of those basic human things, and I also think of that child. Every one of us, I do have kind of a spiritual orientation towards life. It's not a religious in a specific way, but a spiritual orientation toward life. And I do see everybody wanting connection, wanting to be part of something, wanting to be, to feel their integration into this kind of preposterous, audacious experiment that is America. It's an experiment that's so audacious it kind of tripped over its own shoelaces right off the bat. But I do believe that inside of every person there is a longing and an aspiration for that. And if we can ignite that, like I said, I think there's a movement of awakening happening that's bigger than any individual person. And that to me is more fundamental than trying to convince people on some kind of statistical level or moral level or something like that. Just because if you drag them along, they're always going to be pulling back. If you drag them into it, then next thing you know, they're bailing out again. When it gets real, because it has to get real. I mean, we're talking about money, we're talking about resources, we're talking about safety. We're talking about access, privilege. Like, it has to get real. There's no reparations without giving some of that stuff up, giving it at least the illusion of safety and the illusion of control and the illusion of privilege. It's got to go. So how do you if you rip that out of somebody's hands, they're coming after you to try to get it back. So for me, and I have the privilege of being in this kind of, like you acknowledge, this town in the north where there is this kind of progressive mindset. But for me, that has to come, that it has to come from inside. We have to inspire people somehow. And I feel like as a white person, that's my role, is to try to help people for all of our own good, understand why this is what we all need. It's like the medicine that we all need right now.
Yeah, I'd like to interject that the question of how privilege works in the society, and what using the meme of race as a social construct, I think misses a big piece of the issues that we have involved, that are involved in determining how we proceed, because it misses the class element, of these relationships, and the fact that that Amherst is got a 6% Black population. There is also a class dynamic involved in a town like Amherst, which it's the 6% Black population suggests that at some points in its history, Amherst was a sundown town, at least informally, that there were all sorts of ways over the generations that Black people were excluded from becoming citizens, denizens of the town, but also as the home of one of the most elite colleges in the country, private colleges in the country, and I know because I went to one of them, with a huge endowment. This is also a place that priced out, working class people as a whole. Is there some way to with at the same time holding that there is a structural inequality between Black and white working people, at the same time as their underlying interests are there's conflict and solidarity operating at the same breath. And when you are talking about the longing that people have for connection, one of the ways one thing that opens up, or one thing that longing opens up, is this kind of default impulse towards solidarity that working people have, and that seems to be missing from people who are in upper strata. So I'm be very interested to see how the spillover effect of racial exclusion also leads to this kind of class-based gated community, and can we open up those the conversation on both levels without losing the very real basis. Structural inequality in this country, structural white supremacy, has two aspects to it, and both of them have to do with social control by the elites. So, one is privilege and the other is oppression. And how do we acknowledge the role that European American working class people play in acting as agents of oppression, at the same time as we understand that they are not the beneficiaries. You know,
Matthew,
that's
let Matthew answer. David, that was a lot to answer.
yeah, I know. I mean, this is why it's so tough, you know, to integrate, you know, race, class, and gender in a way that we're really talking about power relations. Go ahead, Matthew. I'm going to mute.
Yeah, well, just first, you mentioned about the sundown town. One of the things we dug up in our research was that in 1760, the first free black couple moved to Amherst. And within a year, they had been kicked out because they were likely to become paupers. That was the justification for kicking them out. So there's, like, you know, ground zero, right? And my experience is that when something like that is baked into the pie from the beginning, then it's kind of that wasn't a one-off. That's kind of the approach that this town has had. And
excuse me, but isn't it interesting that I think I heard you say that they were kicked out because they were paupers?
they were likely to become paupers. So it didn't even say that they were already paupers. It was the threat that they were going to become paupers.
Yeah, yeah. But the prediction is, you know, is interesting that it's based on class, you know, as much as the anticipation that because they're black, they're not going to be they're going to become dependents. So I think that's there's something there to be you know, worked with, you know, as far as how this interaction of class and race takes place. But let me. I think this is you know the fact that people of African descent are in that town, you know, going back to before the revolution, you know, is another place. That was the first thing that I thought of, was that this area has a lot of these pre-Revolutionary War Black free people of color settlements, and so, you know, there is this, you know, germ, or this you know, this um, uh, plant that has been there and has been hardy and resilient, and, you know, so I think that's part of what you're testifying to. Okay, um, and
Let
but
Andrew jump back in. David, Andrew, I knew you were gonna say more. Go ahead.
Yeah, you know, I just wanted to say a little bit about in relation to David's question about class. It's clear from our research that Amherst was cultivated as a upper class enclave intentionally. There's a person who was a major real estate developer who actually published magazine kind of things. It was kind of like a combination between a book and a magazine. And as part of his real estate efforts, he was so influential in the town that, and this is, I think, must be like late 19th century, early 20th century. His phone number was 1. You know, when you wanted to call it, when the operator, you had to go through the operator, his phone number was 1. So that's the kind of person this was. And so you read some of what he was putting out there about who he was kind of recruiting. He was the town recruiter. And, you know, there's things like, for the right kind of person, the cost of this house is very good. For everybody else, it'll be very expensive. And talking about college graduates from Amherst, I don't know if it was called Amherst College or Amherst Academy or something at that time, you know, and the quality of people that were settling there. And, you know, there's a lot of dog whistles in that kind of picturing and recruitment effort. And that, so that's here. And again, like, as far as what Michelle and I are dealing with and what our work is centered on, it's here. It's Amherst. This is where we live. This is the kind of space that we're operating in, for better or for worse. The broader question of class, there's so much evidence of intentional, especially during slavery, intentional, at the beginning, kind of driving a wedge between white slaves and black slaves, driving a wedge between poor whites and poor blacks. And so the kind of power structures kind of trying to create division among the lower classes in order to maintain their upper class status. And we see now, obviously, the greater division in wealth. Then, it's like we're trending towards greater divides between rich and poor. And the question of how to help people see the common struggle, the common cause. The thing is that poor, it's so, I'm conscious about speaking in summary or speaking, kind of lumping things, but there's a big manipulation game going on right now with lower to lower middle class white folks. There's a big manipulation game going on around the benefits of whiteness, around white privilege. That obviously those words aren't used, but it's, there's a sense of including those people in the power structure that is just an illusion. It's just fairy dust. There's actually nothing there, but it's being done very successfully so that people feel there is something for them to lose. That and this is kind of goes back to your question before, Tamara, is like what white people seeing this as something that they're losing. And I did specifically say, it has to get real, and people are going to have to, open up the sense of, this is mine. There is a financial reality to it, but at the same time, as long as we see financial life and finances as a zero-sum game, like I either have a ton of money or, and life is good, or I don't. It's like the ultimate benefits of, we have to kind of help people to feel the ultimate benefits of going through a process of healing and how it would empower, support, the equalization process, the coming to terms and kind of welcoming, like creating a family, like overcoming the estrangement of this family of this country, that it would be beneficial, that it would actually help everybody, and it wouldn't be a loss in the end. It wouldn't be a net loss. I mean, David, that's the question you're asking, that I hear, is how to get there, how to help people understand that what we're not talking about here is not a net loss, it's a net gain. And I feel 100% confident that that's the case. And all I can offer is that, my confidence.
It's the word share. When you were talking, the word that came to me was share. And I go back to, I used the alcoholics as as an analogy just a second ago, but I'm gonna use like the kids in the schoolyard when they have to share the ball. You can't keep the ball, you have to share the ball, and that is learned behavior. So I don't know how we're gonna get, I don't know if this, certain generations, they just won't get it, and then maybe with this younger generation, they will learn to share and understand the power of sharing, and what will make America great is when we start to realize that we have to operate in this environment where it's a give and take, and we're intentional about giving. It sounded very school, that was what came to me, the word share, as you were talking.
I think that way a lot. It's very innocent. It's very simple in a way, and and simultaneously the forces that are pushing against this. I mean, you see someone like Donald Trump, President Donald Trump, who is really the epitome of don't share. I mean, that's the message. Look at me, I don't share. I dominate. I push people down. And people are looking to that. I mean, the fact that so many people are looking to that as a viable leadership, like that's what we want as the pinnacle. It points to that. It really is deeply fundamental, but at the same time, it gives me hope that it's not that complicated. It's just a shift from people looking at power, prestige, superiority, strength. That's what I need. And if I don't have that, then it's a dog eat dog world and I'm just going to get run over. To share, all the things I learned in kindergarten, there's that kind of poster that goes around. It's like, that is all we're really talking about. It's not that complicated.
I've tried to use the terminology that I learned, some years ago, that there's a difference between power over and power with, and Trump embodying power over and inviting the many people that he considers his followers to participate in that really is for most working class people, it's an illusion, and that they would be much better off if they were sharing in the sense of power with sharing power. That's the act of that. That's what the Black church calls the beloved community. Martin Luther King. That's King's message of beloved community. It's the same message that's in the working class labor movement. Where the term is solidarity. And I think that both of them mean the same thing. For European Americans, there's a war going on inside of us. It's both an internal war and which side are you on kind of war in the outside world. You yourself, Matthew, model the one side, and your personal history is we have to, because I have similar kinds of background, in personal history, not so much, not as deep and intimate as the one that you described, but my mentors in my late teens, besides my dad, were two very extraordinary African American men. So I had that very, very early on. But yes, Judd Grandstaff, only white people can abolish white supremacy. Absolutely. But the question of how you use that experience in a way that both acknowledges the exceptionalism of it, but at the same time how much it has in common with the experience of working people. That's where, because I think that one of the ways that we're going to reach people is through stories and through their own stories. And there are stories that European Americans have of bad experiences with African Americans and other people of color, but there are also many stories that are of good experiences, like the one that you had, and that I had with my mentors, and collecting them, circulating them, is going to be part of breaking this linkage or this identification with the white race as opposed to with the working class. So anyway, that's just some thoughts. So your experience is not simply exceptional; it's also ordinary, common, something that other people can access, same way as mine is. That's how I kind of interpret it. To find ways to make it ordinary. So anyway.
So Matthew, what's next? Give us on your, tell us like what's coming up next for Amherst, and tell us how we could support and keep in touch, because this, what you're doing is phenomenal work. And, we have our own bill here, HB 541. David and I are going to talk about that at the end of this broadcast, but we're trying to do our own work here in Georgia. So what's next for Amherst?
Yeah, so I mentioned earlier the town is getting legal research, kind of finding out what the possibilities are as far as funding. We've actually asked the town for some money as well to pay both Robin Rue Simmons from Evanston to do the consulting work that she's been doing on the behalf of the town, and also to pay Black folks. One of the things Michelle and I have been struggling with from the beginning is like Black people have been doing this work for free. It's not only like, this is James Baldwin. I think of him as like one of the greatest prophets of the 20th century. And he was so compassionate and so like, looking at white people like, you guys, what are you doing to yourselves? What are you doing to your souls? And I feel that, and so here Black people are kind of holding this whole thing for all of us and for free, not getting paid for it, and doing this work, this emotional labor, this, the kind of bringing these issues forward. And so we've had this kind of tension. One of the things about being a white person in this space is like, we don't want to ask Black people to do more work. And yet the allocations process for this fund can't be determined by white people. And so how do we find that, balance? And so we've applied to the town for some money to compensate the Black folks who are involved in this effort. And we're also exploring some other different pathways for that as well. Like I said, there's another longer research document, probably 30 to 40 pages, coming out soon that will inform the next steps of things and kind of start to build the case. And we're working with a Black stakeholders group who's going to be meeting with Robin Rue Simmons next week to begin the process of talking about how to develop the allocations plan. When the money comes in, what's going to happen to it, who's going to get it, what are the priorities, how's that all going to be worked out? Because there's this chicken and the egg thing where we can't really go to the town or to anybody and say, all right, we're ready to receive funding, if they're going to be like, what are you going to do with it? We can't just say, I don't know, there's a stakeholders group, they're going to figure it out, right? So we're trying to kind of juggle all these pieces and kind of line them up so that they make sense in time. But that's the challenge. So these things are kind of all going on simultaneously. And ultimately, the next step is the fund. I mean, that's where we're headed. That's where we've been headed from the beginning, is a reparations fund paid into by the town, by anchor institutions in the town, by private white citizens, that will be administered and allocated by people of African descent who have been injured by anti-Black racism, structural racism in Amherst. So, that we don't, the time frame on that and how it's all going to come together, we're not sure, but there's several things happening at the same time, moving in that direction.
Well, thank you, Matthew. We're definitely going to stay in touch. We applaud you for all the great work you and Michelle are doing in Amherst, and we're going to stay in touch, and we're going to, figure this thing out as a nation. But it takes, these steps, and everybody's, wherever you are locally, it's going to take these local steps to create this groundswell to get this thing done on a federal level, because ultimately the federal government has to atone. It has to reconcile, and reparations has to be addressed federally. So we're going to continue to do what we do on our local levels, but we're definitely going to continue to push nationally. So I'm definitely going to stay in touch with you.
Awesome. Thanks so much for having me. I really appreciate that opportunity to connect with both of you and just share a little bit about where we're coming from. And I just, to kind of wrap into that last thing you said, we do see our local effort as, you know, when the national conversation, all politics is local, right? So the national conversation, they look out and they see these things happening in different cities and towns around the country. We're hoping that that will help move things forward there as well.
Yep, this is what it takes, the work that we're doing right here and right now. So thank you, Matthew. And we'll have you back, you know, once you guys get everything all together and you have something you can say, this is what we've done, this is where we are. We'll definitely have you back on the broadcast. We'd love to keep up with you.
Okay, awesome. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Matthew.
Thank you, Matthew. That was wonderful.
Yeah,
thank you.
Nice to meet you both. Thanks so much.
Thank you. David, I was having all kind of technical difficulties this morning. I'm on my cell phone and trying to navigate the broadcast from my computer. It's been a morning, but that was some, you know, great information out of Amherst.
Well, I think it's his emotional IQ. You know, that his intuition, his understanding of the you know, the emotional dynamics that are at work is also very powerful, and I really applaud that. So, you know, there's a I think a lot of connection there. I'd be really interested to see, because I lived in that area, you know, for a year. I taught at a college nearby, and I know that there are large swaths of working class communities that have, you know, that are around, you know, the town of Amherst. And it would be very interesting to see if that conversation opens up, you know, extends beyond the kind of liberal, progressive enclave that is the, you know, is the town, which has real material benefits that are not necessarily racial. They're really based on class, you know, to the communities that are much, you know, much poorer, you know, and see if there's way, because that's where power lies, is in, you know, the solidarity across within the working class. So it's going to be interesting to see how they make that connection, or that transition.
Yeah, we're definitely going to have him back. We're going to have him back. But before we wrap up, David, let me have a conversation with our audience this morning. We had Roger Bruce on our broadcast last week, Saturday, and he has introduced HB 541, the Equity and Fairness Commission, which is Georgia's approach to redress, which is Georgia's approach to reparations, which is Georgia's approach to addressing chattel slavery and the impact that it had in this state. There's now a website, hb541.net. And I'm just going to ask our audience to go to the website, read the bill, and donate, because we're at a place and a space and time where we can't wait. You know, reparations is here, reparations is now, and Georgia has to reconcile with what they're, you know, what they've benefited from, and how chattel slavery to this day has had an impact on Georgians. So go to the website, please donate, and participate in this movement, our own movement right here in the great state of Georgia. I want to give a big old shout out to Representative Roger Bruce and those co-sponsors that put their name on this monumental piece of legislation. We have our own movement right here, right now in the great state of Georgia. We're not going to sleep on it. You know, we're going to push hard, and we're going to need all the support we can get. So I'm asking everybody to please go to the website, hb541.net. Read the bill. It is not a long bill. It is straight to the point. is to create an equity and fairness commission that gives Republicans, here's the caveat, it gets no better than this. It gives Republicans the opportunity to lead this conversation. Republicans, 7 out of the 11 seats will be appointed by Republicans. Let them lead this conversation. Not all Republicans are bad and not all Democrats are good. You know, if Black people are true about our history, we were Republicans before we were Democrats. So I ain't mad at either side. I play the middle if you know me well enough. So I want us to go to the website, again, hb541.net. We got our own movement right here, right now in the great state of Georgia. Let's get on it. So David, I'll give you the final words.
Well, I just wanted to mention that I heard a podcast from Fresh Air, NPR, and with Heather McGee, and she just finished a book. She just published a book called "The Sum of Us," and she's a very, very prominent, political activist. She was the head of Demos. She's now the chair of the board of Color of Change, and she's been working on these issues for 20 plus years. And this book is really about the zero-sum game and how this the impression has been deeply embedded into the European American thinking, thinking and acting white, that gains for African Americans mean taking something away from white people.
And it doesn't. And that's why we keep doing this broadcast. And that's why you keep doing the work you're doing. That's why I do the work that I do, because that's not the case. That is not the case. I'll close us out, David. I see your phone is ringing and we're at the top of the hour. I want to thank you for joining us on this week's broadcast. I am Tamara Johnson-Sheely. You can find Mr. David Slavin right here on Facebook at Acknowledge the Divide. Ms. Robbie Caban took the day off today, robbiecaban.com. She'll be back with us surely next week. You can find me, Tamara Johnson-Sheely, at tamarasheely.com. And please, I am begging, hb541.net, Equity and Fairness Commission, Georgia. We got our own fight for the whole, we got a statewide battle that we can win, and we can get this conversation started right here, right now with this Equity and Fairness Commission. David, it was a great broadcast today.
Yeah, terrific, really wonderful. I'm so impressed with what they're doing up there, and I can see these kind of movements taking hold, all across the country on a local level. As that's where we need to do this on the ground, not not in the halls of Congress, so to speak.
No, we are going to do this in the halls of Congress, but it's the grassroots have to start the fire. So we're starting the fire.
Yeah, push the movement forward, so that we make them do it rather than
absolutely. All right, everybody. Thank you for joining us on this week's broadcast, hb541.net. Please donate. We got work to do here in the great state of Georgia. I am Tamara Johnson-Sheely. We will see you next week.
Solidarity forever means privileges never.
Have a great week, everybody.
Take care, folks.